Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I'm your host, Lori Palau, and this is episode 300. I can't believe it. We started this podcast like 6 years ago, and we faithfully been putting out new content each and every week. So if you are new to our show, welcome. Please make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you're listening. You can go back through our archives, and we talk about all kinds of things relating to physical organization and clutter, as well as time, productivity, emotional clutter, all of the things, anything relating to what I call living an organized life. And if you are a faithful listener, you might be familiar with our guest today. And I'm really excited to finally be able to get her on the show. So a couple of years ago, I had a guest on, and one of the questions I ask all of our guests at the end of every episode is, what's a book that you are reading that has been either transformational in your life or something that you highly recommend to other people? And one of my guests had recommended Eve's book, which if you're watching on YouTube, I'll just show you right here. It's called Fair Play. And so I selfishly asked this question because I am always looking for great content. And so if our guests are going to recommend something, it's probably something that I would like too. So I went out immediately, went to Amazon and clicked and bought the book and read it within 2 days. And it was great. And I immediately reached out to my guest and said, thank you so much for this recommendation. It was awesome. And from that point on, I've been trying to connect up with Eve, and we just from scheduling have not been able to make it happen, but it is finally here. And if you guys are not readers or may not have heard of Eve's book, which was a New York Times bestseller, it was part of Reese Witherspoon's book club, but it's also recently been converted into a documentary, which is awesome. And I had the chance to watch it a couple of weeks ago, and it was really, really eye-opening. And I'm going to have Eve kind of really walk us through it. But in a nutshell, the book and the documentary chronicles her own life with her husband and her 3 kids as a working professional, and the kind of disparity in, I don't even know if that's a word, I may have just made that up, but in terms of the kind of the division of labor. And she talks about something that is so poignant. It's something that we talk about a lot on the show, which it's not just the physical stuff, but it's all of the mental load that accompanies the task. It's not just, I need you to pick up the kids from soccer practice. It's knowing that there is soccer practice on this day and all of the things. And so this is something that I see common over and over again with my clients when we talk about clutter being the result of all of this exhaustion. And this is exactly what she walks through. And she tells it in a very anecdotal, tell it like it is, authentic way, which if you've been around me for a hot minute, knows is just my style as well. And she's got another book that's out that's talking about really carving out time for yourself in amongst all the other craziness. And really her messaging aligns so much with what we talk about here. So of course it would be fitting to have her on the show. And she graciously got up. It's early on the West Coast, but she is here from her busy travel schedule to chat with us today. So thank you. Without further ado, let me welcome my friend, Eve Rodsky, to the show. Welcome, Eve.
Wow, what a kind intro, Lori. And I'm so glad I get to be here. I will say that your profession, what you do for a living, does make you extra inclined to like fair play, because we are going to be talking about the secret formula, sort of a magic system. And I appreciate for what you do, because I really do like to prioritize talking to anybody who works on solving time poverty for anybody. And you've devoted your life to that. And I appreciate And this podcast is what I would probably call your unicorn space, or at least one of them. And so I love seeing women in their full power. So thank you for having me.
Oh, that's so kind. Well, thank you. So obviously I gave our listeners a top line overview of who you are, what you do, but there's so much more. So in your own words, just give our listeners a snapshot of you, and then, you can walk us through a little bit about your story.
Absolutely. So I guess what I'll tell you, Lori, is that I did not set out to be an expert on the gender division of labor. You and I were talking about my upbringing, which is similar to your husband's. I grew up very resolutely on the Lower East Side. And in my local public school, if you'd asked me in third grade, what do I want to be when I grow up? I would have said, I don't know, veterinarian or astronaut. But, cut to years later, and I still probably wouldn't have said that this would have been what I wanted to do when I grow up, because I had really big dreams. I thought I was going to be president, senator, Nick City dancer, all three at once. I really truly believed, this lie that society had taught us, that I'm hoping we're dispelling now. In the last couple of years, at least, that was the one silver lining of the pandemic, that really having it all means doing it all. And that's where I ended up. I ended up in a relationship that was breaking down. I like to say now over blueberries. Seth, as you've read, sending me, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries text, which led to a blueberries breakdown on the side of the road, crying over being the fulfiller of his smoothie needs. But I will say that it's been an evolution of a decade. So anybody who's here with us today, we're giving you a 101 tutorial that took me 10 years to unlearn. But really, what I will say is that this work that I do to cure time poverty for women, to recognize the unfairness, the systemic unfairness in how we treat women's time, working on the secret formula for changing the systemic imbalance, all that work really started after this blueberries breakdown. And it was definitely not something, Lori, that I ever expected would become of my life.
And it's really fascinating because we have all kinds of listeners, and your book really speaks, I think, to everyone, whether you are a stay-at-home mom juggling all of the things, if you work outside the home. There's so many threads that cross us over to make us relatable wherever we are in that season of our life, especially as a busy parent, regardless of what that is. And so many people don't have the language to articulate it, and then they become resentful and they become bitter, and there's this passive aggressiveness and frustration in the house. And my listeners know my husband traveled a lot when I have 2 kids. I know you have 3. My kids are older than yours. I've got 2 in college. But I always said I was like a single mom with a paycheck because my husband traveled for the first 10 plus years of our marriage. And these are the days before there was smartphones. So I couldn't even FaceTime the kids. So many things that he missed. And he wasn't out gallivanting with the boys. I mean, he was providing for our family, but it put so much responsibility on me to do everything, to manage all of the things. And like you talk about, even if I'm not out there mowing the lawn, I still had to coordinate somebody who was. Mm-hmm. Even if I am not doing all, whatever. We had a flood in our basement. I have to coordinate. So there's so many things that life piles up on us on top of the day-to-day: laundry, food, chauffeuring, homework, all. And I can't imagine pandemic parenting. I did this when it was easy. And I think that's really, so many people, women specifically, can relate to that. It all falls on me. So I guess my question is, what was the catalyst for you to say, I want to solve this outside of just my own world. Why do I, or my own nuclear family? Because you could have easily said, we need to go to therapy. We need to just figure this out for ourselves. And it could have stopped and ended in your internal family. What made you decide, like, I need to look bigger? I need to see if this is a problem that is, and help solve this for other people.
It's a good question. First of all, we had been in therapy, but that wasn't working either. And I notice now that if therapists don't have a gender lens, it actually could make things worse. So, we need the individual solutions, but we also need a lens to understand the systemic issues for why it is that I have to keep reminding you to put the freaking garbage liner back in the damn bin, over and over again. And how does that connect? How do those private lives connect to the public issues? As one of my favorite sociologists, C. Wright Mills said, private lives are public issues. He actually said private lives are public troubles, but I've modified it to private lives are public issues. And for me, it was many different things. It was waking up to the systemic unfairness in my own house. Like I said, having that mental breakdown. But it really, for me, was, I'll give you one of the stories that sort of made me realize that this was bigger than me, because we don't talk about these things. And what Lori just said, that, thank you for sharing your own private life, because what happens to a lot of women is I think they get shamed to thinking everybody around them has a perfect partner. And so they're afraid to say anything about their partner. Or as my friend Mom Life Comics, she's this great Instagram person. She shares about her frustration with her husband, and she got completely bashed and trolled on Twitter with like death threats to her life. So, women who speak out about these issues, it's not always so easy. But for me, it was really honoring a friend actually who had passed away in law school. We were at a breast cancer march, and I write about this in Fair Play. What it was like to be at a breast cancer march with 9 other women. Not all of us were married to men. Most of us were. And we had this really beautiful day. And I remember this day because it was really vivid in the contrast of the morning to the afternoon. The morning, we were all in pink. We were carrying signs for our friend who had passed away. We were having camaraderie, really this beautiful day, this really beautiful morning in downtown Los Angeles, where the 10 of us were together. And I was with some, women like you, Lori. I mean, these are women who speak their minds in every aspect of their life, or every other aspect of their life. I had a stroke and trauma doctor there, an Oscar-winning producer. I mean, just a lot of very powerful.
You didn't have
women.
they weren't like wallflowers that you were
not
with.
wallflowers, right? They were women like your listeners, strong women who can, are used to using their voice in many contexts. And I remember that at noon, we were like the reverse of Cinderella. We all turned into pumpkins. And we sort of got picked off one by one by, an inundation of phone calls and texts. We got, everything from where is Hudson's soccer bag? If you want me to take him to practice, you didn't leave me a soccer bag, to what's the address of the birthday party? Did you leave me a gift? Where's Anna's pants? But the hardest one for me was my friend Kate's husband, and his text said, "Do the kids need to eat lunch?" And so while we were sort of laughing, I was just thinking, like, what is going on here? This is like we're parenting another child, and this has to have implications. And the implications that day were every single one of those women, every one of them left me and said, we left our partners with too much to do. And they went to go find Hudson's soccer bag, to find the pants, to take a perfectly wrapped gift to a birthday party, Lori. And that was the first day I had an active resistance, or one of the first days, because I was doing some active resistance in my own home. But what I did is, before those women left, I said, look, you got to stop, and you have to help me count up how many phone calls and texts we've received. And it was 30 phone calls and 46 texts for 10 women over 30 minutes. And that's how I knew something was wrong. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm so that's insane. And I can relate because I have I remember reading it in the book and then you document it again in the documentary.
Yes. Yes.
I have a similar situation, wasn't as extreme as that, but we were out. We did a girls' weekend. This was several years ago when our kids were still, they were bigs, right? I call them bigs, but they were like high school age and like maybe one in junior high, not littles, but and for my girlfriends and I, we went to stay at a friend's house in Montauk out in the Hamptons. So it was this great, like long girls' weekend. And everyone except for me was getting texts like that nonstop. And my one girlfriend in particular, we would be like in a store, we were just kind of like bopping around, and she had to keep going outside to take a phone call about things that were nonsense. Like it wasn't anything of note. And I was like, why can they not figure this out? Like, what is the problem? And again, it went back into this kind of like enabling situation where you continue to perpetuate it. And then they're like, I shouldn't even go away because this is what happens. And I'm like, that's not the answer. Like that should not be the answer, that the world can't function without you, or that people can't, that you're the end all be all. And that just is not right. But I could so resonate when you shared that story. I was like, oh my goodness, this is really, I've lived this.
And now it makes me just really angry and sad. And anyone who's going through that or is in that phase of your life, again, remember this is triggering work because this goes way deeper than just a text about what do the kids have to eat lunch. But what I started to do when I was, right after that, I wasn't expecting to write a book about these issues. I was just becoming curious about why this was happening to us. And so I started to write down notes in moleskins, hundreds of moleskins over the past 10 years. And one of the most common little refrains that I was writing on the side of when people were speaking was CIYOO. And it kept coming up over and over again. And what that meant was times where I saw women being complicit in your own oppression. CIYO, complicit in your own oppression. And it started to happen when I would ask women, why are you the one who picks up your kid when they're sick? Why are you the one who's telling me your job is more flexible, even though you're a stroke and trauma doctor and your job is resolutely not flexible? Yes, your partner is a partner in a law firm, but your job is resolutely not flexible, and you're telling me your job is more flexible. So what I was realizing was that so many women were CIYOO, and I was trying to figure out why. Because again, these are strong women when they see it. But what I realized was that it's not so easy. And ultimately, we'll talk about the system of fair play because that's the best part. That's the easy part. But what I realized was that the secret formula for a successful organization, which is what I do for a living, my day job, is I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. And
Oh my
should all
gosh,
feel
I
bad for
started
me, right?
cracking up when you said that because it's, of course, one of my favorite shows. And when you
But
said that,
that's what I do. So I work for families. And what I realize is that I could create systems till you're blue in the face. But and I'm sure you feel this way too, right? If you have a family that is not going to continue the systems, is not going to put the toys back in the landing spot or the basket that you gave to them, or understand why the pantry looks the way it does, or what you want them to do with their mail, then of course things revert back immediately. And so it's really about boundaries, systems, and communication. Boundaries, systems, and communication. That's the secret formula. And we'll get to the systems and the communication. But Lori, if you don't have a boundary around your time, then that's why things are failing. And I kept saying, well, why do women not have a boundary around their time? And what I realized was that the whole house of cards that we live on, which is based on women's time, is really this gaslighting, convincing women that our time is worthless, that our time is infinite, that our time is sand. And that men's time, even if you're not married to a man, this is the heteronormative things that hurt us all, that men's time in the workplace, at home, leisure time, men's time in our society is diamonds. It is finite. So when you have a culture that teaches you that your time is infinite, like sand, and you're supposed to guard another gender's time as if it's finite, like diamonds, then you become complicit in that system. We're told that breastfeeding is free when it's really 1,800 hours a year. If women enter a male profession, salaries automatically come down. So this is not just a one-off. We're telling women since they're born that their time is less valuable, that it's worth less than men's time. And then what happens is we internalize it. And the four things that we internalize it, the four most toxic ways we internalize it are one, saying my husband travels, my husband makes more money than me, my husband provides. I have to be the one who does more in the home. Number two, it's saying I'm more, I do it better. I can do it better. I can do it faster. I am a better multitasker. I'm wired differently to see the garbage liner that's not back in the bin. Or it's saying that in the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, I should do it myself. Or finally, my most scary was women and men in the same profession, and where women were still saying to me, well, yeah, we're both colorectal surgeons, but my partner is better at focusing on one task at a time, and I can find the time. We're not Albert Einstein, Lori. I don't know what to tell you except for that it's not about finding time. It's about how women are supposed to use our time. And God forbid women don't use our time in service of our families, in service of our careers, where the money we can bring in the bacon to help our families, or in service of our partners, then we get shamed for it. So that was the crux of why this is so hard to fix.
And I think so many people, I think what I see with my friends also, whether they have kids who are boys or girls, when I see this complete disparity, I keep making up words.
I love disparity because it's sort of a combination of disparaging and disparity.
I'm literally
which is,
just
by the way, disparaging disparity is exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
Here.
You're modeling this unhealthy behavior of what is normal, right? We say this about all the time. If somebody were to, witness blatant abusive behavior, and that's how somebody says, this is not how you treat women. You don't hit, you don't do that. Society frowns upon that, right? We know that this is not how we model. We don't want to model that behavior. But when women are complicit, the CIYOO, you are also modeling this behavior. And I say that to my friends also, like, you're setting this tone that it all falls on you. If you don't do it, it doesn't get done. This martyr syndrome, or this resentment, or the only time people do this is when I yell, all of these fill in the blanks. And I'm not trying to shame women, but I see this.
No, we've all been that person.
Right.
Yes.
And I see it time and time again. And I see it so often because of the profession, not just in my personal life with my friends in real life, but I see it in my profession with people that I'm working with, clients that are trying to do all the things. And I'm like, and I have this like model, and I talk about it in my book where, when I talk about what I call calendar clutter, which is being so overscheduled that you don't have time to take care of the physical clutter. And especially as women, we have this tendency to say yes and add more to our plate without taking anything out. So think of a closet that you're constantly buying and adding and adding and adding, but you're never removing anything. So you're never editing it. And then all of a sudden, the whole house of cards comes down. And that is what happens if people hit their breaking point.
Absolutely. And that's often when I see men enter care. And it's not the way that I want men to enter care. I want men, my whole mission in life is to, on the systemic level, remove the barriers for men in our society to care, right? We sort of leaped ahead and taught girls to code, but we've never taught boys to care. Babysitters are resolutely young girls, except for when men who are husbands babysit their kids, and then those are the babysitters.
That was
not
one of my
fathers.
biggest triggers.
Yes,
that was one
not
of my
fathers.
biggest triggers when my kids were little. When my friends would say, "Oh, my husband's babysitting," I'm like, "No, he's not."
No, he's being a father. He's called parenting. And so I think what we're trying to do today is really understand that this is not your fault. You know, it's not any of our fault, but what happens is that we become martyrs because we legitimately, things don't get done. And so men, again, this is about this, as my friend Professor Joan Williams says in the documentary, women are just roadkill. This is all about men, right? This is about how, the toxic pressures on men to be breadwinners, the toxic pressures on men to not be caregivers, to man up. And I talk to my sons about this all the time. You know, what are you learning from other boys, other men? And so now they're really aware of these messages that they're given. Doesn't mean that they don't see them on TikTok or joke with me, but it becomes something where anytime they see anything that is gendered, where there's an assumption instead of structured decision making, right? Where there's an assumption of who's doing something because of their gender. They call it a gender emergency. My son Ben was watching Cinderella with my young daughter. That's my middle son. And he was screaming that there's a gendered emergency because the little mice are sewing Cinderella's dress, and the male identifying mice come in to help sew the dress. And then the women mice push away the men mice and say, leave the sewing to the women. And so my son, came screaming in, telling me I had to see something that was a gender emergency. So,
oh my goodness.
So the point is that, you don't have to solve these issues right away. You can just start becoming more aware of them, because just being aware of them and speaking about them out loud is a really, really big system shift in our culture.
And I actually wrote down awareness, because that's the other thing. And I don't want for anyone listening, and I don't think they will, but I just want to put a disclaimer. We're not here to bash. We're not bashing them, but we're talking about just these societal norms. And I think for so many people, it comes down to this: how can we educate people? So, Seth was like, I didn't know, he wasn't intentionally trying to be like, that's women's work. I don't think it was an intentional thing, but so many people, it's just this lack of awareness. And one of the things,
also imagine walking around your whole life where society has protected your time like it's diamonds.
Yes. Well,
and
absolutely.
I think that, like in the documentary, I tell stories about obviously the systemic unfairness and why Seth, exactly, this becomes a love letter to men. Fair play became a love letter to men, was because, what Seth said in the documentary, which was so beautiful. Our director asked him, why was it that there's one incident where he leaves a jacket and beer bottle on our lawn for, 16 hours after texting me that it was there. And our director asked him, which I had never directly asked him, why did you leave it there for so long? You noticed this broken beer bottle and wet jacket for 16 hours. You obviously texted your wife, Eve, when she was away on a business trip about it, and it was still there when she got home. Seth says, something that was really changed my life for him to be able to admit this. He says to the camera, I thought at that point in our marriage, in my life cycle, that it was somebody else's job to pick it up. I think that honesty from men is what we need.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, there's all those, the toxic time messages. I make more money. I'm tired. I get my leisure time. I will protect it because society has told me to protect it. So again, this is not an individual problem. This is a systemic issue. But as we were saying earlier, you can start solving it individually. Doesn't mean that society will start to value your time. Doesn't mean that the school will stop calling you when your kids are sick. It doesn't mean your in-laws will not say things like you have it better than any other woman on your block, blah, blah, blah. But with boundaries, believing your time is diamonds and it doesn't have to be this way. Systems like Lori's system and the Fair Play system and communication, there is a new way forward. And I want people to feel hopeful that this is about solutions. It's not just about unleashing your consciousness to unfairness and leaving you high and dry with no solutions.
I love it. And that's a perfect time. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back. We're going to dive into some of those solutions. So we'll be right back. All right, Eve. So we've all identified now kind of like what the problem is and identifying that there is a problem. And now if people that are listening out there, they're going, yes, I can relate. How do I begin to repair this? What does that look like? What did you come up with? And you document this. Again, we'll link obviously to the book and the documentary in our show notes, but walk us through the evolution of the whole Fair Play system.
And we'll get to boundaries because we need those too, as we said,
yes,
before the break. But let's talk about the system because that's the easy part. The system is actually not rocket science. It's based on 50 years of organizational science that came out of the workplace. Lori, I like to say even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group has more clearly defined expectations in the home. You know, you don't bring snack twice to the group, you're out. So it's really not rocket science. But what the Fair Play system is predicated on was starting where what doesn't work. So what didn't work for me, and I talk about how the evolution started with a list. It started 11 years ago with a list, the Should I Do spreadsheet, which took me 9 months to compile, a spreadsheet that had 2,000 items of invisible work on it that was compiled with those women from the breast cancer march and women across the country. It went sort of viral before things could go viral because we didn't really have any social media back then, besides Facebook. Maybe Instagram had started in 2011. I can't remember, but there was definitely no iPads yet, or iPads were just coming out. So it was really, really early in the social media sector. So I didn't really have much, any templates except for that I wanted to write down everything in the world that was invisible to my partner, that was noted as the second shift, the mental load, emotional labor, anything that encapsulated those terms that I was starting to hear, I wanted to write down. And I ultimately ended up with this beautiful giant 19 million megabyte spreadsheet filled with things like medical and healthy living. It's become, you know, what the Fair Play system is today. I mean, the basis of it, everything, you know, ordering birthday cakes, other kids' birthday celebrations, school forms, grooming for your partner. Because back then, I'm not hoping it's not happening as much now. Women were ordering socks and underwear for their husbands. A lot of invisible work tasks. So I send this spreadsheet to Seth, thinking that, you know, it was going to change my life because everybody said, you know, lists, just make a list. I sent him this giant spreadsheet and I don't even get back words. I get back the monkey emoji, the early version of an emoji, you know, the sort of a pixelated version of the monkey covering its eyes. And in my home, there was a see no evil, Lori, when this spreadsheet came to Seth's awareness, he didn't even want to see it. But in other homes, the spreadsheet was sort of passing through community up, but a woman from the Jewish Federation of Arizona somehow got my cell phone number and left me a message saying, "Oh my God, I received your spreadsheet and I want to let you know that I'm not staying in my marriage." So what happens when you unleash consciousness, but there's no solution, right? So I knew at that point I had to do something. Either I was going to resign myself to doing it all. I think Eat, Pray, Love was pretty popular then. I could eat, pray, love it out of my marriage. But I had very young kids. So that was a privilege that was not afforded to me at that time. Or I could become my own client. And ultimately that's what I did. Lori, I'm assuming, you know, with Clutter Clinic and in all your Simply Be Organized techniques that you use them in your own home. I start to do that. I start to say, well, if I'm my own client and I build family systems, the question I would ask is, what if I treated my home like my most important organization? And so I start to apply all that organizational research to my home. And that ultimately became the Fair Play system. The Fair Play system is predicated on one simple rule, and I call it the life-changing magic of mustard. If you can buy in to mustard, you will understand fair play. It was a realization that when I was asking couples to try to get data, because we now know men overreport by almost 2/3, women underreport.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't getting an accurate assessment of what was happening in people's homes, even though women were telling me that they were sick, they were fed up, they were crying on a dime, and men were confused and frustrated. They didn't understand and know their role. The only way to get to that question was to first ask, well, who picks up groceries in your house? I would get, we both do. Who takes the kids to school? We both do. Not helpful. So I had to change and ask the most important question I've asked in the past 11 years. And that question, Lori, was, how did mustard get in your refrigerator? Because I asked it in 17 countries. Because there's a condiment in every country that you can substitute in for mustard. Although mustard is pretty popular everywhere, I will say.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Who knew
the
mustard would be the
Who knew?
Would be the conduit?
But that was it. The mustard was the answer, because what I would hear in these hetero cisgender relationships, which again is where all of these assumptions come from that ruin it for the rest of our family structures, including single mothers and LGBTQIA couples. What I would hear was, I'm the one noticing my second son, Johnny, likes French's yellow mustard on his protein. Otherwise, he won't eat at night. He chokes. That conception, we get paid big bucks for that in the workplace. Then I would hear, yeah, I get stakeholder buy-in for whatever my family needs from the grocery list. I monitor the mustard for when it's running low. I didn't hear stakeholder buy-in exactly, but you know what I'm saying. I was hearing planning talk, which is another phase of sort of organizational management, project management. And then I would hear, oh yeah, and then I send my partner to the store and he brings home spicy Dijon, Eve.
I was just gonna...
And you want me to trust him with my living will? Well, he can't even bring home the right type of mustard. And that was it. That was the crux. It was the aha moment. It was the light bulb. It was the fireworks. I realized that in any organization I work in, this was as bad for men as it was for women, because we tell organizations, if you give people control and no context, it is toxic. Men are living in a place of control and no context. Women are living in a place of mental overload. You can solve that issue when you start to look at the home as not a list, not a running list, but as a ownership mindset. And that is what happened in my home and thousands and thousands and thousands of other homes that are playing fair play. You move from a 50-50 list to an ownership mindset. And the good news, Lori, is even men who travel, your partner could have been an active player. Surgeons are active players. I have astronauts who are active players. I thank you, NASA families. You're one of my favorite places to go speak. So it does not matter. It does not have to be 50-50. It can work in extenuating circumstances. One card of 100, the fair play system, the shit I do list evolved into a card metaphor. The fair play system is 100 cards. And once you hold a card, you hold it with full conception, planning, and execution. That was the life-changing.
That's the key. And that's the key that I really want you to kind of hone in on, because and Zach talks about it so beautifully in the documentary, your son does, but it's about, you are owning this job, whatever this job is, from start to from conception to completion. And that is the beauty of it. So you don't have to come in there and chime in and micromanage, because once I've delegated that, once it's been delegated to you, that's yours to own. So can you give an example or a couple of
let's
examples?
do an example.
Yeah.
Because I want to explain how small it can be.
Yes, for sure.
How change can happen. And for Seth and I, it was garbage. And I know that sounds, again, so small, but it was really interesting how first I had to, and again, it's often right. I mean, I do it for you, but at this point, it was my job to have to educate and change the system. A lot of people who are oppressed have to do their own work to get out of their oppression. It's not the way it should be. I wish this book could have been written to men, but not when I was writing in 2016. And now I could write, a sequel to men, but this is still really messages for women saying, we'll get out of our own way. We can stop being complicit in our own oppression. And we can start to think about our lives in a different systemic way. And for me, it was garbage. It was saying to Seth, okay, we're going to the ownership mindset. We're going to start with one card, one card in the 100. And so what garbage meant to us, right? The CPE of garbage, it's more complicated in LA. It means you have to know when the bins are going up to the street. You have to put the garbage liners back in. You have to go to the little garbages around the house and dump the little garbages into the main garbage and then bring it out again to the street before garbage day. You have to put the liner back in. So Seth was really on board with the ownership mindset because he said, well, obviously that's how I do it at my workplace, right? I don't have my employees are not walking into my office saying, hey, what should I be doing today? I'll just wait here till you tell me what to do. I would fire them, right? And so Seth realized he would fire himself if we kept on working without an ownership mindset. So we got that. But I think the biggest hurdle, Lori, was what I talk about in the book, and I call it the minimum standard of care. We don't talk about these things. So even if you have a system with conception, planning, and execution, if you actually do not have conversations about what the minimum standard of care will mean for the frequency of that task, you cannot implement the system. So it's actually two parts. It's understanding what ownership mindset means. So if it's planning your kid's birthday party, ownership mindset can mean anything from, the theme to serving your kids for what friends they want to bring, to obviously booking the birthday cake, to booking the room and the Chuck E. Cheese, whatever, all the way to showing up. Doesn't mean your partner won't help you along the way. In supporting you, being a stakeholder in the planning, but ultimately you're responsible for the whole, any mistakes that are carried through. So for Seth and me, I was still his garbage shadow. And what Seth said is, look, I understand the ownership mindset. So why are you stalking me over garbage still? Mm-hmm. And I said, because Seth, there's a garbage peel. There's a banana peel sticking out of the garbage. And Seth said, well, it's not even the night. And what we realized was that I was expecting garbage to go out ideally like 20 times a day. Anytime he would be home, maybe he'd check it in the morning. Maybe when we got home from work, he would check it again, maybe right before bed. So nothing was in the garbage. Whereas Seth was expecting that garbage goes out once a day. And that actually is a reasonable person standard for garbage to go out once a day. And once I realized that was okay, as long as it was consistent and it was happening every day without reminders. But we didn't get there just by saying that. I had to sit him down and say, I grew up in a single parent household, Seth, with cockroaches and water bugs. And I talk about this in the documentary. Mm-hmm. And I had a disabled brother and I put him to bed as a latchkey kid so many nights. And so when I see garbage, I am completely transported back to that time in my life where I would get my disabled brother a glass of water before bed. And I had my cockroach and water bug routine, which is I'd close my eyes before I would turn on the light in the kitchen and wait for the water bugs and the cockroaches to scatter before I would get my brother his water. If I was smart enough, I would have just kept the light on, but I think we didn't have enough money for electricity to keep our lights on like that. So once Seth understood that there was a lot of pain around garbage for me, and we had never talked about it. We never told each other our stories. Now I ask people to ask all the stories. Where did your partner go to camp? What was their experience with extracurricular sports? Who took them to their extracurricular sports? What did they have for lunch? Did they have hot lunch at school? Did they bring bag lunches? Did they pack it themselves? Did their parents pack it? These questions, we think we know our partners so well, but we actually have no idea about their lived experiences in the realm of domestic labor. So that is the beauty of this system, is that it forces you to have really beautiful conversations when emotion is low and cognition is high. And that's where we end on communication. Boundaries, we talked about. Your time is diamonds. You have to believe that to enter the system. System, CPE. It's about ownership, not 50-50. Communication, start with your why. Tell your stories. Invest in check-ins when there's high cognition and low emotion. Things none of us do, Lori. None of us do this. And I know that because I have the longest longitudinal study of unpaid labor in the world now. We don't communicate about domestic life. And then we dump wet clothes on our partner's pillows when they forget to put the laundry in the dryer. So that full circle for me was how my life started to change. One conversation about my childhood with Seth and garbage started to get empathy back, started to get systems in place that have ultimately changed our entire lives. Our entire lives.
It's so profound. And I mean, if anybody's watching, like I was feverishly writing, because so much of what we talk about here is about communication, conversations, and expectations.
It's the same.
It's the same
You
thing.
are the same. Yes,
I
same.
tell this
Hashtag same.
Yeah. And before we go to our last break, I just wanted to share this one story. So one of the big things, and I kind of, you kind of, made a reference to, my family's always been my guinea pig for everything that we do here, right? Every system, every strategy, every product I've ever used, it's like, we're going to try this out and see if it works. And one of the things when my girls were younger is I learned my definition of a clean room is very different than their definition. And this could go for a spouse, very different. And using general language, and I think a lot of this can apply to the work that you do.
Yes.
Is using general language is so different because it's very broad. So when I say, I want you to go up and clean your room, in my mind, that means I want you to put all your clothes in the hamper. I want your books on the bookshelf. I want your toys back in the bin. I want your bed made, right? That's what I feel. To her, a clean room is, I'm going to take everything and shove it in my closet or underneath my bed so the floor is clean. Well, they're both right, depending on how you define a clean space, depending on how you define what it is that you're looking for. And I see so many people, so many battles surrounding clutter and organization. Excuse me, because that's the work that I do, has to do with, if we could really hone in and be specific when parents come to me and say, how do I get my kids to, or even again, the bigger thing is, how do I get my spouse to, which is, a bigger thing because you're not their mother. But one of the first things I say is be very specific. Instead of saying, I want you to go up and clean your room, which is broad and overwhelming and obscure, I'd like you to go put your books on the bookshelf. I'd like you to pick up all your Legos or your American Girl stuff or whatever it is. Be very specific. And I want that away. And when you can give these small actionable and be very clear, then people feel more empowered to do these things.
And then can you imagine if you pair hot mess with fair play, where you take it a step back and you sit your daughter down and you say, okay, I'll do it in my own life. I had a father who wasn't around, Anna. And so every weekend when it was his custody time and my mother needed a break, I would go to my grandmother's house, and I loved her more than anything. And I had two grandmothers, and I had one who had more means, an actual home, and another one who lived in sort of housing projects. And I loved that grandmother, and I loved going to see her. But she lived with my uncle, who was schizophrenic, and he lived in her home with her, and a husband who ended up with schizophrenia as well, in a very small 2-bedroom apartment. And I would go, and my grandmother was amazing, and I loved my uncle Marty, and I loved my grandpa Murray. But my grandfather Murray would sit in his bed and pee into a bottle, and the bottle would spill out everywhere. And my disabled uncle, my schizophrenic disabled uncle, he was a hoarder and saved everything. And so when I'd walk into this space, I would have to climb over cardboard boxes and books and pee to hang out on their brown couch. Again, I felt incredibly safe. It was a wonderfully loving place, but I can't live like that as an adult. And so my expectations for clean are probably too intense for you. They're probably too intense, because in my house, in my life, if I see a piece of paper and it's out of place, I just chuck it in the garbage. I take a picture of it, and you probably should be allowed to have some books out. So maybe, since your lived experience is not the same as mine, we can come up with a middle ground, a minimum standard of care that can make us both happy to live in this place together, where I don't have to be triggered when I see your room, but you also don't have to feel like you're living with a tyrant.
It's yeah. And I mean, we could talk for hours, which we're gonna wrap up. We'll have to have you back, because
we'll come back for a part 2.
Yes, for part 2.
Get some listeners' questions.
Yeah,
and we'll come back.
Absolutely. I would love it, because the work that I've been doing the past 5 years surrounds personality type and clutter, and understanding how we see the world through different lenses based on not only our lived experiences, but just our genetic and our environmental makeup and all of the things. And so the triggers with how some people have a visceral reaction to clutter, while other people I call it, are like clutter blind and can just walk by things. And it really all just kind of weaves back together. But before we kind of tie this up with a nice, neat bow, tell our listeners, where can they go to learn more, get the book, documentary, connect with you, all the things?
Well, I think the best place is Fair Play Life, because a lot of the tools that you would need to implement some of these things, that these complex things we're talking about today, are there. We have done all the work for you. You can find what I call the CPE checklists, every single card with the breakdown of what it means to conceive, plan, and execute that card, that task. And we have and definitely sign up for our newsletter, because we do a roundup of all the systemic issues for why this has been so hard. So you'll get to feel like you're a cultural warrior, and also obviously find tools for your own house.
I love it. And we'll link up to that. We're going to take one more quick break, and then we're going to come back and just wrap up by putting you in the hot seat. So sit tight.
Love it.
All right, Eve, this has been great. And again, I could just talk to you for hours on this topic, because it's so important. It's so relevant. And people, I think, again, spend so much time just looking at kind of the symptom that's in front of us, as opposed to really taking the time to peel back. And that's exactly what you've done through this. And it's really, you could see it. It's been transformational for people. And thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom with our community. All right. So I always ask 3 wrap-up questions for all of our guests. And as you know, as I said in the intro, the first one is, right, it doesn't have to be right now, but is there a book, could be something that you're reading right now, or something that you come back to that you recommend that's been really inspirational or transformational in your life? Share what that could be. or what that
Yes,
means.
well, there's two. There's one called The Creativity Leap by a woman named Natalie Nixon. It's a small book, so it's really easy to read. But it's a perfect pairing for my second book, which is Find Your Unicorn Space, which is about what do you do with all that found time if you use the systems of Simply Be Organized and Fair Play. So I would say The Creativity Leap is a beautiful book for actual return to creativity. And then my other unicorn space, which we didn't get into,
I know
Lori.
I was going to say what we
I
didn't.
know, but
Oh,
but we will. Like I said, we can do
yes.
some listeners and a part two. But unicorn space is this idea of what is these active pursuits that make you you that are beyond self care, a one off spin class, and friendships. Really, experiences in your life that combine the ordinary and the extraordinary. That's a healthy and happy life. And so the second book is sort of random. It's called Magpie Murders by a man named Anthony Horowitz, because one of my unicorn spaces is that one day I want to write an Agatha Christie level murder mystery. And so I read
Can I be
every
on your
single
launch
author
team?
that I love.
Can I be on your
Yes,
launch team
yes,
for that?
yes, yes, please. Or at least my beta testing reader.
Yeah.
It is so hard to do a believable, really complex whodunit. And I think Magpie Murders does it in such a beautiful way.
Okay, well, I will link to all of these. Yes, of course. And I do feel bad that we didn't get a chance to do a deep dive into unicorn space. But again, I think this is really a meaningful, purposeful conversation that we had to unpack.
We had to have. I agree.
We had to have it. Okay. And our last two questions, which could be lighthearted and fun or super serious, however you want to answer it. In this particular season of your life with kids, a career, all of this other newfound stuff that's going on with the I don't even know what you would call it, the movement of the fair play movement. Where do you feel the most organized, and where do you feel like you're a bit of a hot mess?
Well, I'd say I'm a hot mess. Anytime I think about just the fight that we're going to be going through in for the rest of our lives, your entire daughter's adult lives, to value caregiving, to get society to realize that having it being built on the backs of the unpaid labor of women has made us physically sick and taken away all our time, which has allowed a lot of bad actors to come in and take away our rights. So I'd say that's where I'm a hot mess. I still can't wrap my head around what's happening in this country. And so anytime I think about it, my stress cortisol just shoots through the roof. And I'd say where I feel most organized now, actually, ironically, is in the place this all started, which is my home. Even here, we're living in Idaho for the summer, for part of the summer. And we always check in every night. We go return to our systems. Garbage goes out, dishes are out of the sink. It doesn't mean it's easy, but I'm so surprised by the thing that was hardest for me, Lori, has become probably the most seamless. But again, that's why I've been working on this for 10 years.
But
right?
It's work. It becomes it's practice. It's
well-oiled machine. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Practice.
Yes. And I mean, literally coming from a blueberry breakdown to feeling like everyone's, like you said, a stakeholder. And I love that. And you are proof, and I am proof that you all listening out there can have this, that it just takes time and work and communication, but it is something, and we owe it to ourselves, and I think to our kids, to be able to set the table in a healthy way. So thank you for leading the charge on that. All right. Well, that is it for this week's episode. Again, thank you so much, Eve, for coming on. Thank you so much for listening. If you want, head over to YouTube. If you prefer to watch the conversation, if not, make sure to follow us on social media and let us know what your thoughts are and kind of where you're struggling. Make sure to tag us at Simply Be Organized or This Organized Life podcast. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, peace out. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simply the letter B like boy organized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.